So welcome to week 5. How crazy is that to think about this being week 5? And we didn't even start at the beginning of the quarantine, so
Wow.
yeah. I think it's been 55 days since the quarantine started.
Wow.
So anyway, in week 5, I want to start by giving people the opportunity who didn't go last week to share either their lament or their experience doing the prayer of examen.
I'm going to go first before I talk myself out of it.
Yay!
And mine is actually about anxiety, and it makes me feel anxious to read it. So, but here goes nothing. Oh Lord, how long will you let me struggle through this anxiety? Do you see me and hear me as I cry out for help? I long for you to turn my fear into faith and my panic into peace. Trapped in these walls I have imprisoned myself in, rescue me. Bring revival and restoration to my mind and soul. Lord, you are faithful and good. I will wait on you in your faithfulness.
Good. That's great.
Good job.
Good job. I loved it.
So if you're really struggling with anxiety, I would encourage you to try the prayer of examen exercise as well. Not that you'll have to report on it, but just for your own self. I think things like stress, bitterness, anxiety, a lot of these kind of situational fixes we get into, not that this is like a magic cure-all, but it is a healthy way to recognize and to process those feelings. So good job, Ashley. Anybody else? David, are you raising your hand?
No, just turn up the volume.
All right. Do you have a lament for us?
No, I do not. But in my defense, I went last week, so you can't give me crap about it.
You went last week?
He did.
Yeah, I did.
He did.
I'm getting old. The mind is a terrible thing to lose.
He didn't do the lament though.
I did
Oh,
not
that's
do
right.
it.
You did.
And
You
I
did
will
prayer
not do
examen.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah, we did the prayer exam, and we have been. We still been doing it. It's been fun. It's been good.
Yeah. Oh, cool. Cool. That's good. All right. Melody's been putting a lot of stuff out there on Facebook, so I'm curious to see what she's got.
Oh, I don't have Miss Zoe here to play the ukulele.
Where is Miss Zoe today?
It's a double act. Where is she? She was on the thing earlier.
Yeah.
Okay, so mine's not as good or poetic as Ashley's, but I'll go for it. Oh God, how much more can we lose? We've lost jobs, our security, our loved ones, our health. We've lost dreams and plans and celebrations. We've lost the ability to give and receive comfort or warm embrace. God, we just want to feel normal. We want you to restore as you did with Job after you stripped him of everything. Please bring an end to this disease and to our isolation. But then I seek your face, and I know that you're still there. You're still listening. A mind being healed, a relationship being restored. You do answer your prayers. You are the God who sees us, who sees me. You will not abandon your children.
Nice.
Nice.
That's good.
That's beautiful.
That's good. I don't know why you're downplaying that.
It's what I do. You've known me long enough. You know that.
Yeah, fair enough. All right. I was talking smack about Matt as he came in the door. So Matt, I'm curious to see what you put together.
Mine's about the same length as Melody's. I don't know if it qualifies for your word count. Why do the wicked and despisers of God continue to prosper? Why do they that seem so far from you, O Lord, retain a blessing? But we who have loved you, God, are perishing. We who know that you and you alone, O God, are the one true God. I remember, Lord, when as a fool you led me from my folly to your holiness. I remember, O God, when I was without understanding, you imparted wisdom by grace. I look back at the days of my youth that have passed and know that it was thine hand which sustained my being. You showed me your path of righteousness. I know that one day, according to your faithfulness, that all them which are last shall be first in your kingdom. I know that I am going to your Jerusalem, where there will be no more death, no more tears, and no more sorrow. I know I will be in your presence, O God, and so be with you in perfect peace forevermore. I rejoice at the great things you have done.
Wow, good job, Matt. Man, you like to sneak under the. You need that pressure to help you focus your thoughts. I'm the same way, to be honest. It gets harder and harder though as you go further and further in school. Like in undergrad, it worked really fine, and then the papers got longer and longer, and then it's like the night before, and I'm writing a 20-page paper instead of like a 5-page paper. Yeah, not the best, dude. But good job, man.
Still at the elementary level, so.
All right. Does anybody have something prepared for tonight? I don't want to pass you up. Anybody else ready to go tonight?
We were doing the prayer of examine.
Okay, so tell us about your experience.
I loved it. We've been doing it kind of when we think about it, but like pretty regularly before we go to bed. And that's been helpful, just kind of like after the day is over and praying about whatever concerned me before I go to sleep and thanking God for the cool things that happened. Cool meaning new birds found my bird feeder, like, these kind of days.
Yeah.
So just like, I feel like it's really helped me to think about the little things and like recognizing God being involved in the little things. As well as like the taking sorrows to God that's something that God was already dealing with me about. And so that's only helped to like me to continue asking for his involvement. What do you think?
Yeah. I think you summed it up quite well for us.
Man, a few words. I appreciate that. Yeah, I think you hit it on the head, Lizzie. Seeing God in the day-to-day, sort of the mundane, if you will. Like we always look for God in the miraculous, like a job offer or something just stupendous that happens in our day. And we often don't look for him just in the everyday, minute-to-minute kind of things that don't seem quite as special. And thus, we don't see God's hand anywhere in our life. And so Emily can testify to this. She and I were working. If you've been following on Facebook, we've been building a table, and we actually have the top almost completed. But these are big pieces of wood. Like each of those long pieces weighs 30, 40, 50 pounds, some of them. And so in trying to join them together, you can't just use standard like commercial grade equipment. So I've had to figure out a number of fairly creative workarounds to make it work. And some of them have worked and some of them have not. But I'm at the point now where, like, if I mess something up, the table dimensions are changing, like for smaller. And so, there's like a last minute one line prayer as we were starting to put the first two boards together. And I think I said, Jesus, take the router or something like that as a homage to Carrie Underwood's Jesus, Take the Wheel. And that night I was sitting there thinking like, oh man, the table went together amazing. Like the router system worked beautifully, and actually having that discipline to stop and go, all right, thank you. Like I said that prayer sort of in jest, but also just like a hope that it would go okay. But I'd say without that discipline of having that time of gratitude, it's really easy to let those moments pass and just forget, okay, I asked God for this, and in the moment, like God answered it. And so, yeah, that was good. All right, does anybody else have something prepared? If not, you can go next week. But I don't want to stifle anybody. Andre, did I see your hand?
Yeah, I said next week.
Oh, next week. Next week. Okay.
Yes.
Emily, I see you smiling. Do you have something this week?
I've also been doing the prayer of examine.
Okay.
I too have actually been doing it before bed, and it's just been a really good time to see that even if I have been having like a really bad day or a really great one, it's not one of the extremes. There's always something that has gone well in that really bad day, or something that's gone wrong in a really good day.
Yeah, that's good. All right, anybody else? Going once? Going twice? All right, so we'll have, I think there's 4 left: Raj, Clayton, Val, and Donna. Y'all can go next week. So you can pick either the lament or the prayer of examine to try. So with that in mind, I'd like for us to go ahead and get started. Let me share my screen with you here. So this week is we covered one of these sort of practical interludes. So this book is a mashup of some poetic sections and some. Obviously, there's these case studies where he's saying, "Here's what I see under the sun." He describes it, and then he describes his response to that. And then there are these other sections where he's trying to just shed wisdom on what does this all mean. And so last week we covered the first there's a kind of a triplicate thing happening here. And the first one was starting in 4:13, better is a poor and wise youth than an old and foolish king. And so that was wise interlude number 1. And the next 2 happen right here in chapter 5. So I'm going to go ahead and read. I'll go ahead and read the whole chapter. It says, guard your steps when you go to the house of God. To draw near to listen is better than to offer the sacrifice of fools, for they do not know that they are doing evil. Be not rash with your mouth, nor let your heart be hasty to utter a word before God. For God is in heaven and you are on earth. Therefore let your words be few. For a dream comes with much busyness, and a fool's voice with many words. When you vow a vow to God, do not delay in paying it, for he has no pleasure in fools. Pay what you vow. It is better that you should not vow than that you should vow and not pay. Let not your mouth lead you into sin, and do not say before the messenger that it was a mistake. Why should God be angry at your voice and destroy the work of your hands? For when dreams increase and words grow many, there is vanity, but God is the one you must fear. If you see in a province the oppression of the poor and violation of justice and righteousness, do not be amazed at the matter. For the high official is watched by a higher, and there are yet higher ones over them. But this is for the gain of the land in every way, a king committed to cultivated fields. He who loves money will not be satisfied with money, nor he who loves wealth with his income. This also is vanity. When goods increase, they increase who eat them. And what advantage has their owner but to see them with his eyes? Sweet is the sleep of the laborer, whether he eats little or much, but the full stomach of the rich will not let him sleep. There is a grievous evil that I have seen under the sun. Riches were kept by their owner to his hurt, and those riches were lost in a bad venture. He is the father of a son, and he has nothing in his hand. And he came from his mother's womb. He shall go again, naked as he came, and shall take nothing for his toil that he may carry away in his hand. This also is a grievous evil. Just as he came, so shall he go. And what gain is there to him who toils for the wind? Moreover, all of his days he eats in darkness, and in much vexation and sickness and anger. Behold, what I have seen to be good and fitting is to eat and drink and find enjoyment in all the toil with which one toils under the sun, and the few days of his life that God has given him, for this is his lot. Everyone also to whom God has given wealth and possessions and power to enjoy them, and to accept his lot and rejoice in his toil, this is the gift of God. For he will not much remember the days of his life, because God keeps him occupied with the joy of his heart. So he starts with some words about worship, and there are 3 there are three instructions that he gives for them right there in the beginning of chapter 1. And so step number 1 is guard your steps. There's, people come down on different sides of this issue where we focus all on kind of the form and the process of the worship. Different denominations sort this out differently as well, right? So higher church denominations tend to stress very strongly, the order of things. How is a particular thing done? What are the words that are said when that particular thing is done? And on the other side is more the belief and the heart intention behind something. And so people tend to focus on one side or the other, and I don't think you can leave either side off. And so with this, he's talking about it's not just the actions that we do for God. It's not just performing the sacrifices. It is actually having our heart prepared to commune with God and to listen. So step 1 is guard your steps. He's basically saying, hey, be careful when you go to the house of God. The second sentence says, to draw near to listen is better than to offer the sacrifice of fools. So this is kind of, it's sort of saying the same thing, but this is kind of a 2-in-1. So number 1 is it's better to draw near and listen. That's number 2. It's better to draw near and listen. I think talkers like me probably struggle with this. The idea of solitude and silence with God is terrible sounding. I know it sounds bad to say that that's terrible, but in my mind, like, I hate silence in conversations. When I ask a question to a crowd of people or to my students, if there's too long a pause, it just makes me really nervous. Sometimes I have to literally just hold my tongue so that someone who's more timid will pipe up and answer something. But while I'm doing that, there's just this growing balloon of awkwardness is about to pop for me. And yet, his instruction is it's better. I mean, basically, it's better to be silent and just to listen to God than to do what? To offer the sacrifice of fools. And he actually calls this evil, for they don't know what they're doing is evil. Is there any story in the Bible that this reminds you of, where obedience was better than sacrifice?
Abraham.
Abraham?
When he took Isaac up on the mountain.
Yeah, that's a good one. His obedience was to sacrifice, but then God allowed a substitution for that. Okay, are there any other examples where obedience is better than sacrifice?
I was thinking of Ananias and Sapphira.
Ooh, yeah.
They went at least, I guess, to the gathering, not really the temple as it would have been in Solomon's day, but they spoke part truthful, half-truths, I guess, and paid the penalty for it.
Yeah.
Great find, by the way.
What's that?
Great find. Great answer.
Yeah.
Sam.
That's a good one. All right, any more?
What about Saul when he couldn't wait for Samuel and he sacrificed because he don't want to wait for Samuel anymore, and then Samuel say, "What have you done? Why couldn't you wait for me?" And then this is actually not what God wants for you to do, but you did it. Why? Like,
Yeah, these are three great examples where the form of worship was one thing, the obedience was another thing, and where God's decision was this kind of overlooking thing. So with Solomon, he was told, wait, don't save anything, commit everything to destruction. And then Samuel gets there and he goes, what's the sound I hear? And he goes, well, I was going to give it to God. I was going to offer it in sacrifice. And that's where Samuel says to obey is better than sacrifice. But the one with Ananias and Sapphira, also good. There's this impression that I'm being obedient, while secretly my heart is being stingy. My heart is, seeking the praise of man on the one hand, but then secretly keeping things back. But it turned out not to be a secret. And then Abraham, another great one, where the call to a literal sacrifice was so strong and obvious and yet so terrible. We read that story without thinking, but imagine if your neighbor said, oh, I'm taking a trip, and you go, yeah, where are you going? Oh, we're gonna go up to the hill country, just me and my boy. Yeah, what are you gonna do? Some camping? Well, I mean, kind of. We're gonna gather some wood, and I'm probably gonna kill him and sacrifice him to God. Who told you this? Well, I heard a voice, and the voice said, kill your son, and so I'm gonna do it. Right? We would all hop on the phone real fast and dial 911. We wouldn't go, oh, wow, what great faith you have. You should really listen to the voice. We'd say, no, you're a psychotic loon. We have to put these stories in modern day context to see how serious they are. Though with all three of these examples, we see that there is something that goes beyond the action. So I think there's two sides to this coin, and we don't want to stress one over the other, right? There's times where my heart is not in things, but I should still be obedient, right? Because God calls us to obedience. On the other hand, there are times where my obedience is simply an act of hypocrisy and is itself kind of an act of sin. I'm not, and I realize it's kind of paradoxical, but I think both of those things are true. So I think there's times where, we should not take Lord's Supper because we're dealing with a fault with a brother or sister in Christ, or we're dealing with a personal sin of some kind. But I think there are times where our attitude isn't right and we're not excited about doing whatever, and like there's also a time to get in there and do it. But I would also echo Solomon's thing, which is take heed, be careful, because we really need to examine ourselves during those times. I think I don't typically teach out of this translation, or have never taught out of this translation, but if you want some interesting reading, read the Message on Isaiah chapter 1, because he puts it in such, slang isn't the right word, but such everyday language. He talks about like God asking them, in a more serious translation, it says, who has ordered this trampling of my courts and the sacrifice of blood and goats? I'm going to close my ears to you. But in the Message, he gets very, very contemporary with his language. So he talks about at your next prayer meeting, I'm going to stop my ears up. It's just very, very to the, puts his finger on the issue kind of thing. But you can see how God feels about sort of pretending that we're religious, but our hearts are really far from God. That's a serious thing. So his next advice, he goes into talking about making an oath or a vow, and he says, don't delay in paying your vows to God. He has no pleasure. Don't try to call backsies and say, oh, it was a mistake. I didn't have a full plan in place. He says, why should God be angry at the sound of your voice and destroy the work of your hands? That's a serious thing. I don't know. We've probably all had somebody in our life, maybe right now during COVID. If that person is sitting next to you on screen, please don't react when I say this. But at times, people, just the sound of someone's voice is like nails on a chalkboard. And so this is Solomon's warning: is don't let your voice be like nails on a chalkboard to God. So pay your vow. Can anyone think of a story where someone has made a crazy vow and then struggled to pay? Or maybe you yourself have. This could be a personal contemporary story. It doesn't have to be a Bible story.
In Judges, the account of Jephthah, I think in chapter 11, I think. He made a rash vow before going into war. Basically, he vowed a vow to the Lord and said, Lord, if you will give me my enemies into my hand, the first thing that comes out of my door when I get back home, I'm going to offer it as a burnt sacrifice.
Uh-huh.
And it turned out to be his daughter.
Yeah.
So,
there's some interesting stuff with that story. And one side of it that we don't, as Westerners, don't understand is that in the Middle East, animals are present in homes. So that, I do some teaching on a Middle Eastern view of the nativity story. you don't want to listen to it if you want to just hang on to your nice traditions. If you want those, shaken up a bit, I'm happy to share some files with you. But the people struggle with the idea. Everyone's image is that Jesus is born in the barn, in a barn, because in our world, in our culture, we keep animals in the barn. But in many other places in the world, people keep animals in the home. And actually, that would be one illustration where it's likely that his original vow made sense. The other way of understanding that would be to say, throughout the pagan world, child sacrifice is a very common thing. It's common in the Old Testament. People who would offer their children to Molech, the false god. In pagan Greek culture, this was another thing. The Iliad, I want to say, it's either the Iliad or the Odyssey, I can't remember, begins with Agamemnon sacrificing his daughter Iphigenia to the gods so that he will have favorable winds to sail and get there. And of course, it's a terrible thing to think of that. But there are points where in Israel's history where even they got into child sacrifice. And so with this story with Jephthah, it's a very real reminder of to be careful with our words, to be intentional with our words. This is actually why I think writing laments is better than just quietly grumbling to ourselves. We've been reading through Exodus as a church this year, studying through Exodus in our Sunday schools. And there's a scene in there where the children of Israel coming to Moses, and he says, don't think to yourselves that you're grumbling to me and Aaron. You're actually grumbling about God. And so he makes it very clear that this quiet murmuring that's happening through the ranks and through the tents is not just sort of horizontal gossip that we could excuse of like, well, he's not my favorite leader right now. Moses goes, no. Vertically, you're attacking God. And that's a dangerous place to be. And so in the same way that Solomon would say, hey, guard your steps when you go to the house of God. Now he's taking this down to our words and saying, guard your words, because if you don't guard your words, the sound of your voice is going to make God angry. So this concludes kind of his little wisdom section, the second one. And so we'll look at the next one. In this next one, he starts talking about the oppression of the poor, which he's kind of cycling back to something that he said before. And his advice is, don't be surprised. I was talking with some people today about the recent shooting. And on the one hand, it's always shocking. On the other hand, let's be real. We have a book that tells us that the human race has fallen and is continually in a downward spiral. And so we should not be surprised when sinful people do what sinful people do. And so not to just be callous towards the pain and suffering that's in the world, but to act shocked at everything. Well, I can't believe that politician did this. I can't believe that pastor did that. I can't believe brother so-and-so, sister so-and-so did this thing. The reality is that every human being has the ability to commit every kind of sin at every moment. That's the state of the fall. And even for us who are in Christ, I mean, we are in Christ and our sin has been conquered in an ultimate and future way. But in a present way, we are still dealing with the results of the fall. And so Solomon rightfully says, don't be shocked when you see this kind of thing happen. It's going to happen. David writes through a number of the Psalms. Psalm 10, he writes a lot about the oppression of the poor, the righteous poor at the hands of the ungodly rich people. And that one's I'd say it's a challenging passage to read. Don't read it on a bad day. This next verse, or the second half of this verse, for he's watched by another official who's watched by a higher, and there are higher ones over them. People have taken that two ways. One way is to think like the watching is they're going to contradict what this person has done, like they're kind of the guardians of this. The other one is the opposite view, which would say like the whole system is corrupt. So either way, he's saying don't be surprised. So he goes into this little section in verse 12. Sweet is the sleep of the laborer, whether he eats much or little, but the full stomach of the rich will not let him sleep. So this word laborer really is slave. It could be translated slave. And so he says, sweet is the sleep of the slave. Is he saying something positive about slaves? Why or why not? Anybody? You're on mute, Matt.
I was saying I hope the bubble's going to pop soon.
So let's think about the context of the book. In the context of the book, everything is vanity. So on the one hand, he could be saying this could be one of those it's better to be this than that type statements. Like it's better to be a slave who sleeps, all night long rather than a rich man who can't sleep at all. But I don't think he's saying that.
And has a full stomach.
Yeah. I think he's saying both are vain. And part of that's, I think we'll see in the context of the rest of this passage. The idea of a slave having sleep, it's an irony. What good is sleep if you're enslaved? It's not any good, really. What good is riches if you can't sleep? Well, it's not really good either. So both are equally ironically bad. And this is what he goes on to make the case. So he's talking about the virtue of enjoyment. And so this is his next kind of test case, if you will. So verse 13 says, there's a grievous evil that I have seen under the sun, riches which were kept by their owner to his hurt. Is Solomon anti-riches?
Andre said no.
No, okay. Why not, Andre?
Well, because I mean, because he believed God has given him prosperity. He has that, but it depends on how you take that prosperity. If that's become your, what would I say, your God, then who give you that, then it is a loss. So yeah, but I don't think riches is, I mean, because God wants to bless us, why not? Yeah, but it just, I think as a human, sometimes we take, once we have, we make it as that's maybe because it's a physical thing that we experience. Maybe it's because that's something that we're taking pleasure of, that we forget God who's given us that because we don't see him, or I don't know, it's always, yeah, stuff like that.
Yeah. I mean, he has a lot to say about money. I skipped over verse 10, but he says, he who loves money will not be satisfied with money, nor he who loves wealth with his income. This also is vanity. When goods increase, they increase who eat them. So, people get more and more, but then, you hear about these NBA stars or these pop stars or people who just come into money fast and haven't really kind of built the discipline of what to do with it. A lot of them are broke. I mean, they're making multi-millions of dollars a year. Like in my head, you go, Brian, how much do you need? I would say, well, just a little bit more, which is both true and ironically funny, because somebody who's like Bill Gates probably just wants to make a little bit more. We all want to make a little bit more. But as I make a little bit more each step along, the past many years of my gainfully employed life, literally those who consume them have increased in my household, right? As we have more more kids, or just life gets more expensive, you get paid more, you get taxed higher. Like there's no getting ahead. So I agree, Andre. I don't think he's going against riches per se, but he's talking about riches that are kind of pursued for the value of themselves. And second, that they are pursued with a hurt to the person pursuing them. And that's what he says in this verse. There's a grievous evil that I've seen in his son. Riches were kept by their owner to his hurt. Can you think of an example of kinds of riches that are kept to the hurt of the owner?
Situations like any sort of riches that forces someone to become like a workaholic, using that term in and of itself. So you make so much money, but even not being able to enjoy the actual wealth thoroughly, let's say, because then you're just constantly in that grind of trying to obtain more, and so that just kind of defeats the purpose almost, but they just can't stop, it seems. And so a lot of people who have that mentality just don't stop, and there's no real sense of peace or any sort of rest that they can truly enjoy. And a lot of those people get really frantic or just don't know how to enjoy time off, if you will. In an extreme case, it's easy to tell, and we can judge those people quickly. But I think that even in a non-extreme case, a lot of people have that, where we're not talking about making, millions and millions of dollars or something, that we perhaps would consider ridiculous, but even just like an average Joe just cannot being able to enjoy those riches because we, constantly think of what is next, if you will. So that comes to mind.
Yeah, when we bought our house, we were approved for an amount that was ridiculous compared to my salary. And so we were buying at a much lower bracket compared to what I was approved for. And at first, my realtor, he's trying to upsell me, like, oh, no, you have all this extra money in your budget. Why do you keep looking for lower price houses? You should go to the top of your budget. And then when we finally bought the house, he kind of came to me. He must have shown us 60 houses. Like the houses were flying off the market. We'd have a list of 10 on Friday night. We'd be out at 6 a.m. on Saturday morning. Half of them would be sold already. So houses were flying off the market. So he did a lot of work for us. So we kind of developed a relationship over the course of looking for a house. And when we bought this one, he kind of confessed to me. He goes, Brian, you're really doing the smart thing. I go, what do you mean? He goes, I was approved for $500,000. So I bought a house that was $500,000. He said, but I work 2 jobs. My wife works 2 jobs. And they're in like a 6,000 square foot mansion thing way out in Katy somewhere. I don't even know. He goes, we both work 2 jobs. He goes, on Saturdays, it's our day off, but we go garage sailing. And we're trying to buy collectibles at garage sales, and then we put them on eBay. And I mean, the guy, I don't know when he sleeps. And he doesn't, it's not like he's enjoying his $500,000 home. He's just working to feed the beast so he can have it, but just keep working. What are some other examples of money kept to a person's hurt?
When you can't sleep at night because you're afraid somebody's going to take it from you, or you're plotting all the time how to keep your unwashed relatives or whatever from taking it. Right. You have to keep figuring out, and also how you can pay less taxes. You've got to figure all this stuff out. That can cause a lot of anxiety.
Yep.
And now with the market going up and down and whatever, my goodness, anxiety. Not for me, but for some people maybe.
So somebody was griping to me about how much money they had lost in their retirement fund with this downturn. Yes. And it was more money than I make in a year.
Yes.
I was like, man, that must be like, I don't have that in my retirement fund, much less could lose that much. It's just, I don't know what his total amount was worth, but it must have been pretty significant. What are other things we could put in this category of money kept to a person's hurt?
I think do parables count?
Yeah, sure.
I think the parable of the rich fool in the Gospels, The one who is kind of like almost a picture of the American dream, right? How retirement is looked at as the end all be all of existence. Once you get there, you've made it. In the parable, Jesus says that it's a man whose land was bountiful, and he was trying to figure out, what to do with himself, what to do with all of his resources. And he decided to kind of just tear down what he had and rebuild it up to where he was more comfortable. And then he said that he's going to spend life being merry and treating himself. But that's when God required his soul of him, and called him a fool in the process. And Jesus basically said that so will be the fate of those who are rich towards themselves and not rich towards God. Pretty much all the storing up, all the living for the material things, instead of being generous towards the Lord, by way of various services, or overall just not living for material, as though it's master.
Yeah.
I just thought of one too because of Clayton, where the rich young ruler comes to Jesus and says, like, I've done everything, I've kept every law. And Jesus says, but one thing you lack, go and sell all you have and give to the poor and follow me. And he went away sad.
Yeah. Yeah, the rich young ruler is an example of that. I think somebody brought up Ananias and Sapphira. That's another example of riches kept to a person's harm. What did that little extra, cost them? Their integrity, their reputation, their lives even. I think we're so excited in the process of getting and the desire to get. And I'm not saying that having money is wrong, and I don't think Solomon's saying that either. But we do it to a degree that the very thing that we're wanting and we think gives us meaning is actually the thing that's harming us. Which is, kind of a difficult truth to get all the way to the top of the ladder and realize you have it on the wrong wall. But that's what a lot of people are doing in life. I think some of it also comes down to how do you define riches? In our culture, riches is money, it's just wealth. And in other places, and I think if we take a more holistic look at wealth, it's kind of like happiness. If we think of happiness as just that sort of wee feeling, well, happiness is a very cheap thrill. But if we think of happiness as this whole life, live towards the highest good, well, that's a very different, that's more more similar to joy or something like that. I think wealth is the same way. If you look at wealth as just more dollars, that's a very cheap view of wealth. And because of our culture impressing this on us and everybody around us impressing this on us, we think of getting more means just more stuff. And I think there's a number of kinds of wealth that are out there, just like there's a number of kinds of intelligence, right? You've probably met people who are really book smart, know every fact about everything, but have no common sense. You've probably met people who have tons and tons of common sense, but aren't very educated. My grandfather on my mom's side has a third grade education. So in the ways of, books, academics, credentials, not smart at all. But he could take one listen to an engine and tell you exactly what was wrong with it just by the sound. And so his ability to hear a sound and extrapolate what does that mean mechanically deep inside something I can't see, and he could do this on oil rigs, which is how he made his money. That's a certain kind of intelligence that a lot of people don't have. You go to cultures where they do lots of hunting and gathering, and some of the trackers, they will take one look at a hoof print and will tell you how fast the deer was running, how high he was jumping, was something else chasing him, was he like thinking and feel like they can tell all of this from one footprint. And I think wealth is a similar thing. If we expand our view of wealth, hopefully our desire for it will become more than just a pursuit of money. Solomon talks about a good name is, greater riches, is greater than riches, is greater to be chosen than riches. We're taught that children are inherited, or there's so many things that God expands this idea of what is wealth and what is blessing beyond just dollars. David, were you gonna say something?
Yeah, and Aristotle makes a similar comparison when it comes to, and like you kind of said, wealth and happiness, kind of mixing of the two. But an example given is wealth so that in the sense that it's relative. So the example given is health. So someone who is healthy or someone who is ill looks at the healthy, and they have the object of desire, which is health. And so in that moment, they are wealthy in their health, in having that, and
Right.
just kind of uses that as an example to show how it's relative and it can change from time to time, from person to person. And he uses health as another example of something that you could be wealthy in.
Yeah. I mean, I think friendships and relationships are a kind of wealth. I mean, we've probably all met people who are very sad and lonely. Even rich people can be sad and lonely. With COVID, probably a lot of us are sad and lonely. And yet we meet people who may or may not have money and material wealth, but are very rich in terms of children and family and neighbors and friends. And in some, again, in other cultural contexts, it's actually better to have the right connected friends than to have just a deep well of money. And so this is the idea that Solomon is building, is that there's a kind of wealth, there's a kind of money that people keep to their own hurt. In verse 14, so he's keeping this money to his hurt, then he loses it in a bad venture. So let's just say, like, this is dirty money. So he got all this dirty money, he's brought on a bad name, he's brought on a bad reputation, he's broken the law, the police are chasing him, whatever, right? His life is totally messed up because of this money he tried to get. Now he's trying to invest it in a venture. He's trying to launder the money, so to speak, and he loses all the money. So he spent all that time working for something that he doesn't even keep. And the saddest line is the end of verse 14. He says, he is the father of a son, but he has nothing in his hand. And what he's saying is there's no inheritance that he can give to his son to pass on to him. There's no legacy, if you will, to pass on to him. Verse 15, there's a number of parallels to passages. You can help me build this out. But he says, as he came from his mother's womb, he shall go again. Naked as he came, that he shall take nothing for his toil, that he may carry away in his hand. What does that remind you of? What does that phrase remind you of?
Job.
Okay, tell me more about Job.
He lost everything. He lost his children, his wealth, everything, and even his what would I say? His health. So and he basically said the same thing that's on 15, that naked as I came, naked as I will go. So
yeah, from dust to dust, ashes to ashes, dust to dust. From dust she came, from dust she shall return.
Yep. Psalm 49 also describes this, talks about coming naked from the womb as well. So there's this idea that in our culture, we've devised, or in various world cultures, we've devised different ways to ascribe meaning to people, to ascribe importance to people, wealth, status, stature, respect. Every culture has their own way of doing this. But the painful reality is we were all born naked and we're all going to leave the world naked. There's not a thing that we're bringing with us when we go. And so this is a bit of a contradiction to the reigning culture of his day, or some previous cultures to his day. So we're all fairly familiar with Egyptian culture, where people would take not people, only the wealthiest of the wealthy would have entire armies, navies, riches, servants, etc., entombed with them when they died, so that in the afterlife they have all this stuff, so they spent their whole life working for everything, and then they get put in here, and in the afterlife it all sails over and crosses with them. And the reality is it doesn't. Even knowing that, even having the ability to pass wealth to children, there's still a certain sting in our culture where the government, takes their part. And if we don't establish a will, they might take all of it. So there's just these stark realities of money. You can be the most successful person in the world. I mean, Bill Gates, super rich guy. He's going to die one day. He's going to leave the world just like he came into it, naked. And all of his money is going to go to somebody else that didn't work for it. Lots going to go in taxes. I'm sure he's already decided to give a lot of it away. Hopefully his kids will get some of that. But none of it's going with him. So you could be at the pinnacle of human success, and we all die the same way. But with this person, Solomon goes on to describe him. This is also a grievous evil, verse 16. Just as he came, so shall he go. And what gain is there to him who toils for the wind? So he's just working for the wind now. Moreover, all of his days he eats in darkness and in much vexation and sickness and anger. Now, here's the funny thing. If you've ever been poor, or you've been among what sociologists call the working poor, that's basically where you might work a full-time job, or you and your spouse work a full-time job, or you both work multiple full-time jobs, and you still really can't make ends meet. There's a certain toil to that. There's a certain drudgery to that lifestyle of not being able to take a sick day. That's one of the tragic things with COVID, as people are being forced to stay home. For some people, it's like, yay, free time, learn a new hobby, go for walks, whatever. For other people, they can't afford to take the time off. They're not paid sick time. They're not paid leave. They're not salary employees. They're not making anything during this. And so we all understand the toil that person goes through, probably because at some point in our life, whether it was our college days or whatever, we've worked and worked and worked to make the ends meet, and magically they met somehow, but only barely. But for the rich, it's the same thing. Here he's describing the rich person as, how do you get riches? Well, for this person, they work and work and work. They eat in darkness with much vexation, sickness, and anger. And so even through their success in obtaining the riches, at the end of the day, they spent all this time working and eating in the dark, without any enjoyment of it. And so I think he sees the poor man, the slave, the worker, as he sees the rich man. If they can't enjoy it, what is the purpose? And in verse 18, this is why he says, behold, here's the good statement. Behold, what I have seen to be good and fitting is to eat and drink and find enjoyment in all the toil with which one toils under the sun the few days of his life that God has given him. For this is his lot. Everyone also to whom God has given wealth and possessions and power to enjoy them and to accept his lot and rejoice in his toil, this is the gift of God. So this is a very clear statement of this is God's gift to you, that you are able to enjoy what you make. A friend of ours, his 3 or 4 connections removed, someone close to him died, and we went over to help him and help his sister clean out the stuff. And there's all of this junk. Hundreds of windows that he'd gathered, all of this extra lumber that he gathered, these supplies that he gathered. And I'm like, this would hit close to home for me because I'm a gatherer. Okay. Someone offers me, hey, here's a pile of lumber. I'm going to take it and I'm going to add it to my stack of resources. If I find something on the side of the highway, I'm throwing it in the trunk. I'm bringing it home. It's going in the stack of resources. But I'm looking at future self and realizing one day I'm going to die, and someone else is going to come clean out my junk, and they're all going to be looking at each other, rolling their eyes, going, what on earth did he save this pile of stuff for? So I'm both in a race to try to acquire resources to build projects that I want to build. At the same time, it's a real tragedy if I do all of that work and never build anything in time to enjoy anything, because what's the purpose? There's no purpose. So that's not riches by any standard, but it's this striving after the wind where you can try and try and try, but if you aren't able to enjoy it. So to have riches and not enjoy it, this brings us back to that verse about the slave versus the rich man. To have riches but not enjoy it is worthless. To have enjoyment but no riches is also worthless. And so both of them are in an equally deplorable situation where one has the means and nothing to do with it. The other has nothing to do with it, but has the means for enjoyment. And so that's the worst, I think it's Solomon, that's the worst case scenario, to be so focused on trying to get stuff that you can't enjoy it. But he says God's gift very clearly is to be able to have some stuff that you enjoy and the power to enjoy them and to accept his lot and rejoice in his toil. This is the hard part for us to get. Like, we look at the toil side of things. Like, I realize, this table I'm building, I'll enjoy it for some years, maybe some decades, hopefully. But at some point I die and it's gone. It goes to be a family heirloom. So I can, Emily's already putting her name in the hat. Calm down. So it becomes a family heirloom. Now, I could throw myself into despair and into despondency over the fact that, well, what do I get? 3 or 4 more decades, enjoy the table, have people over, have some fun, and then it's gone. Woe is me. Or I can go, hey, this is my lot in life. It's the same lot that everybody has. We all live, we have some time, we die. Yet, if I can find joy in that, Solomon is saying, then there is more purpose in that. So the idea that I could build this table and that this table will live on past me is actually kind of cool. Not that I want my children to fight over, but that is something, that children might fight over is cool. My grandfather's built 17 guitars, and I have number 4. So if you ever see me play on church, or if you've seen the Corin tunes online, that's the guitar I'm playing. He's hand built it. And so several of my siblings had it. I was the first one that wasn't him to get it. I'm just going to say that since I have another sibling on the call here who also has one. Sarah, what number is your guitar?
Mine's number 14.
Yeah, okay. So you can see how much closer in the progression of his love I am as the favorite grandson. But
you're also way older than me.
Whoa, slow down there.
Take that, old man.
Yeah, Emily told me today, after a pretty serious bike ride of my own, that I need to face facts about my own limitations. Thank you, dear. Yeah, so, yes, he works and he toils, and ultimately he's going to die and not be able to enjoy these instruments that he's built, but they live on and we're able to enjoy them. And if he can find satisfaction in them, and he does, he's going to be happy with that. If he just goes, well, what was all this for? I can't use it anyway, then everything in life just becomes burdensome. And so it's not just having the understanding to enjoy it. It's not just having something to enjoy. It's also the acceptance of the lot and the toil in all of this. And if we can have the possession or the wealth and have the power to enjoy and accept our lot, Solomon says this is the gift of God, is to be able to understand all of these things. I think this is probably something that maybe it's generational, maybe it's cultural, I don't know, but it seems like more and more, I guess humans have always wanted to escape death, but it seems like if you've grown up on a farm, or very close to farm culture, you're around a lot of death. You got a chicken, you got a hen house, you kill some chickens, you slaughter a pig, you see an animal die or an animal gets hurt that you can't save and you got to put them down, so the whole life death cycle is very near to you. And I think for city people, this is not nearly so close to us. And because of this, we are not just afraid to die, but there's this, we just put it out of our minds, kind of like Pascal says. where we don't think about it. There's no acceptance of our lot in life. And I think, during COVID, as beds are limited and as the breathing machines and whatever else, are running in short supply, people are being forced to make end of life decisions that they normally wouldn't make or wouldn't have to make for a little bit longer time. And this is a struggle for us to accept the toil of our lot. But for us as Christians, we are aware of the truth that we are under sin. And being under sin doesn't just mean that we sin or that we are sinned against. It also means that we're under the bondage of death until we die, and then we're released from it. But until that point, we're under the bondage of death. And yet, in this short time that we have, God has given us the ability to have some pleasure in our lives and to enjoy it if we focus on it in the right way. And the final verse, verse 20 says, for he will not much remember the days of his life because God keeps him occupied with joy in his heart. He's going to be so happy that he's basically going to forget all of his toil. I don't know that I'm that kind of person yet, anyway. I want to be that kind of person that I don't focus on the toil of doing stuff. Right now I have so many projects out the wazoo. That's kind of where my focus tends to be from day to day. But the idea that the joy that God gives us in our hearts exceeds our daily toil to the fact that, to the point that, to the degree that we forget about our daily toil. Wow. That sounds pretty awesome to me. All right. Does anybody have any questions or comments on this passage?
What you just said kind of makes me think of, like, its simplicity is that if we do not enjoy the things from day to day, and if the Lord is the source of our joy, then we are not only missing enjoying those things, but we are missing the joy of the Lord in and of itself. Like you said, he is the one who sustains that within us with that verse 20. And so it makes it even more so important to focus on that, which again, it's simple and it's a bit repetitive almost now at this point, but like that's kind of I guess like not a revelation, but kind of epiphany of like it's not just, enjoy the little things that you have or the work that you have or whatever just because it's all useless, but because that in and of itself is the very joy that the Lord gives you, and you miss out on even those things. And we have a tendency to do that. I think we heap praise of wisdom to thinking ahead and being prepared and stocking up on resources, if you will. And so just kind of like that mentality. And so it almost makes it feel like what is it? Carpe diem. What is it? Carpe diem kind of feeling of like seizing the day of in the moment and staying in there, but obviously in a more bit of a Christian tone. Yeah. But yeah, just that's what comes to mind.
I'll also add too, if it's okay, to what David said. Reminds me, like, I've always hated work my whole life. Ever since I was a little kid, I hated work, and yet God has given me a life full of work. And I've always said to God, well, if you just gave me the resources to do whatever I want, I wouldn't have to go to these lousy jobs every day, and I could do so much more for you. And fairly recently, God has changed my heart, where before I would grumble and complain. Now I've said in my heart, it's actually a privilege to be able to go to work. And as I've said that in my heart, it's a privilege each day, I notice I'm enjoying going to work more and more, where I used to despise it.
God's hands are in the mud. If you look at Christian art and symbolism, so much of it is God is this otherworldly, out there in the clouds, invisible, indescribable thing. And the reality is that God created everything around us. And so his hands are in the mud. There was no reason that we can discern as to why God created us. Why did God create the world? God is a God where he worked in 6 days and rested in one. And again, what is the purpose? To what end, other than just his own enjoyment and glory, would he get his hands dirty, if you will, in creating the world? Other than that's part of who he is and calls us to be in that process with him. And I think when we see that, the balance obviously is not to go, I love work so much that that work becomes kind of its own God to me, and I serve and worship it. But the flip side of I don't embrace any work, that's not good either, because God is a God of work. He has a will and he's bringing it to pass, which takes work. David, you said something and it made me think. There's so many Christian songs where we sing about Jesus is enough. And I think probably we would all give the Sunday school answer, yeah, Jesus is enough. Like we'd all just yes. But the reality is the amount of want that we have in our lives shows us that we're not experientially living into that belief that Jesus is enough. We're thinking of the next model, whatever, a little bit more of whatever. But I think in this passage you see, and you see that idea that at the end of the day, if we don't get to the idea that God is the source of our happiness, that Jesus is enough, then what are we doing? We're playing some kind of game against ourselves, like the case of the man who stacks up riches for himself, where all at the end of the day, it's all going to be taken from us, and so it's ultimately worthless. So if we don't get to that point, and I've even had like really dark, cynical periods in my life where somebody like, oh, you just have to understand Jesus is enough. And of course, verbally, I'm like, yes, you're right. Inside my head, I'm like, yeah, right, come on. But that is the reality. And there's a gap, and this is where discipleship comes in, right? Here's the gap of here's where I am right here, and here's where I'm actually experientially satisfied with the idea that Jesus is in fact enough. And the disparity between these two places, this is my growth in discipleship to get to this point, where this idea is more than just an intellectual, yes, Jesus is enough, but an experiential understanding of, yes, Jesus is in fact enough. Because a little bit more, it's not going to do it. I want more food, I just get hungry again. What's the point? Any other thoughts or ideas?
I think this reminds me also of 1 Corinthians 7, verse 29 to 30. I think just the common theme is you're not happy if you are holding the things of this world too tightly. Mm-hmm. So that's always been in the back of my mind. Like everything, like if you hold on to it too tightly and you lose focus on God being the center of the universe, not you or not the people around you or even the things of this world, you're holding to it too tightly, So like in 1 Corinthians 7, 29 to 30, it's like, keep it simple, like let those who have wife like live as though they had none, and those who mourn as though they were not mourning, and those who rejoice as though they were not rejoicing, and those who buy as though they had no goods. Mm-hmm. So the key is not to hold to anything of this world too tightly, because everything is going to be gone one day. Just live for the moment. If, like you say, if Jesus is enough, then he's enough. Everything else is fleeting, can be taken away at a moment's notice. So if Jesus is enough, then he should be all that you obsess about, that you hold on to. Everything else, just let go. Even things that you love, even your family, your riches, your jobs, just be loose with it. Just be loose, That's what I think.
So there are points in our life where we get to that realization that Jesus is enough, and we sit happy in that. And in a Job-like way, sometimes God allows us to be tested and to go, okay, let's see how you're doing this time. So we've been living without an AC. We actually finally, praise God, got an AC recently, but we've been without an AC for some months. And that was kind of that was part of what was in my head while this was happening was, you know, of course there was like angry, God, I need more so I can do more. And then, but I know like if I do more, I'm just going to do what I want with it. Which at that point was fix the AC. But it also like every time we have a want or a struggle, Job talks about, there's a verse in Job, he says, I esteemed your words more than my necessary food. And so it's the idea of like when you're fasting, the idea is when you get hungry, that's the moment where you go, okay, let me think of God, right? That hunger pain is kind of an experiential way of going, remember God, remember God, remember God all day long because you get hungry. And I think with our other trials in life, if we have to take those into consideration, go, okay, this is my moment to go, I need to experientially be content. And the fact that I'm not content is a reminder that this is an area where God is growing. I need to remember that Jesus is enough. The fact that I'm bitterly not thinking that Jesus is enough is a demonstration that there's still a big gap between where I'm at and true existential understanding of Jesus is in fact enough. All right, we're a little bit over time, so I'm going to go ahead and close it off here. Thank you all for coming and hanging out and chatting. This was fun. I will see you all next Thursday. So if you've not shared last week or this week, I will put you on the spot next week to share. So there's the lament or there is the prayer of examine. Either will be a valuable exercise for you. So if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to help.